Hey folks, just a quick intro about myself. Merill Fernando, I'm a product manager in the Microsoft Azure Active Directory team in identity. Funnily enough, I joined Microsoft about 3 years ago, and this is my first sort of public conference and my very first public talk as well. So please bear with me. And I'm glad it's at a Microsoft, it's not at a Microsoft conference, it's at a Mac conference, even better. So some history about me. Before I joined Microsoft about 3 years back, I used to work at Telstra for about 10, 12 years, where we rolled out Microsoft 365. And one of the fun things I got to do towards the end there was to migrate a lot of users, about 90,000 users, from on-prem MDM to cloud-based Intune and Jamf Pro for macOS. So it was a really fun experience getting users, 90,000 users, to uninstall one MDM and switch to the other MDM. So lots of battle scars from that one. Right, so I just want to get a feel for the room here, for the folks here. Can I know how many of you use Microsoft 365 in your org? Okay, almost everyone, right? Can I know how many of you use Azure Active Directory? Cool, that's good. So this is more like a trick question, because if you have M365, you have Azure AD, but it's just that some people don't know. You can still be having things like Ping, Okta, even ADFS, which we don't want you using anymore. But Azure AD still powers the sign-on experience behind the scenes. So it's always there. How many of you have heard of Enterprise SSO? Okay, everyone has. And how many of you have deployed it? Cool, perfect. So there are a few more people that I can help deploy. And the good thing is we have some updates on how you can troubleshoot Enterprise SSO and so on with your customers. So I'm going to share some updates on what you can do and how you can dig into that behind the scenes. Okay, so a quick run through of the agenda. I'll just cover what Azure is. I'm not going to spend time because most of you already know. I'll talk about why prompting is bad, and we've had a few different talks today, starting from the Essential 8 on how security is coming, and there's this whole thing about security and admins having to be involved, at least know all of that. So I'll give you some tools that if your users are being prompted all the time, you have security policies that are making them prompt. I'm going to give you some tools that you can take back to your stakeholders, cybersecurity, to talk to them about balancing the prompts with the better experience for users, but also more secure. So we'll go through some of those things. And then it's going to be more of a few demos that I'm going to show on the Enterprise SSO, deploying it, how you can troubleshoot, why it's not working, and some under the covers things of how it works. Okay, so this is just one slide I'd quickly go through. So Azure AD is Microsoft's cloud identity provider. It's basically an identity as a service. It's an IDaaS solution. So there is no one server. We have multiple nodes running across the globe, serving millions and millions of users signing in every time. And even if you're not signing in right now, even on your phones, if you're signed in, getting Outlook or Teams, every hour, each of your apps is signing in behind the scenes, getting a new access token, refresh token. So all of that's happening even when you're not aware of it, things that are happening behind the scenes. So Azure AD powers all of that. A lot of folks think that Azure AD is limited to just Microsoft 365. That's not exactly the case. Azure AD can be used as the identity provider for any of your applications. So whether it's ServiceNow, whether it's Salesforce, we handle millions of sign-ins from third-party enterprise applications as well. So it's been built for the new world where everything is moving to the cloud. Your apps are moving to the cloud. Devices are no longer in the network. They're outside. We have applications are hosted out in the cloud, SaaS applications, and the network is no longer that control thing, right? You don't want to be connected to the VPN when you're at home or at the cafe. So identity for us is sort of the underpinning thing that controls what users access, how they access, and how they get into things. Okay, so before I jump into Enterprise SSO, why is prompting bad? So I'm sure if you had seen any of my colleagues' presentations before, we've covered some of these. So when users see these prompts, so for example, Amy posted about don't blindly accept MFA requests if you're not trying to log in. What happens is attackers get in and they start phishing users, sending them lots of prompts, and users, just to get rid of it, they just accept it. So, we used to have in the Authenticate app, we used to have this approve reject before, and we found everyone was just to dismiss things, they were just approving them. So we actually bringing in some changes from the Authenticate app where it's no longer just approve, yes, no, you need to type in a number, making it a little bit secure. There's a little bit more work to do. Unfortunately, we needed to drop support for the Apple Watch in the process because didn't really work that well there. Yes, I know. Like I was that was like one of my selling points to get people to use the Authenticate app. But yeah, we couldn't get it to work with the Watch OS and how it works, and it wasn't reliable as well. So there are a few different factors in that. Yeah, another example where a company where they were getting users to sign in every single day. So every morning they come in, they needed to sign into all of the apps. And I work with some large enterprise customers in Australia, and it might not be every day, but it might be some places have like every week or maybe once in 2 weeks you need users to sign in, and people have just accepted like, okay, that I can't help it, I need to do that. But that's not what we want you to do or we want users to experience. And then the productivity hit, right? So how many times are your users signing into, spend their time signing in when they should be contributing to, the productivity of your company and competing and, doing things that they need to do, as opposed to just spending time waiting for an SMS to come or an MFA to finish the prompt. So this is an interesting sort of case study. A financial company in Europe, they did sort of an internal assessment. So they had one of their testing teams, the cybersecurity teams, got the go ahead and run sort of a simulated attack on their own users. So they initially did some password spray attacks, found out all the users that had weak passwords, and then they started hammering them with MFA prompts, right? And then the results were really interesting. So first, none of the users that were getting these prompts, nobody called the help desk to say, hey, I'm getting these weird prompts, right? So the help desk was completely unaware that their users were being attacked. Second one was is even worse, right? So many users just get rid of it. They just blindly approved it. Like, these prompts are coming, I just press yes for it to go away. If I say no, it keeps coming back. So they just hit yes, that's gone, right? And one user then they found out had uninstalled the Authenticate app. He didn't have any other MFA methods, and they're wondering how we actually did this work after that for the rest of the day. So some news closer to home, and you've seen, like, we all know about the Medibank and some of these hacks, and Guardian actually reported that the Medibank hack was initiated by the stolen credentials of a user with high-level access. The Parliament House, similarly, users were phished. They were sent MFA prompts. Somebody said yes, and they were able to get into their network. Similar thing with Services New South Wales. So phishing attacks are becoming common now. These are like the big ones, but they happen all the time, right? Like, your organization, if you go and ask your cybersecurity team if you weren't aware, they would tell you, yes, we have users hitting approve or their account being compromised. So it is something that happens quite frequently. And what makes it worse now is there are these, at Microsoft, we released a report recently about a group called Dev 1101. So that's one of the groups that's now selling a high volume adversary in the middle phishing kits. So they sell these on Telegram, on various places. You can just pay like $100 and get the kit. You don't even need to install anything. You just do all those things through your Telegram bots. They deploy it for you, and they harvest the passwords, and then you get a place where you can go and download the credentials of all the compromised users. So back in June, they used to sell it for like $100, this kit. But with our mortgage rates rising, expenses going up, cost of living going up, they're now selling it for $300, right? And you can get a VIP license for $1,000, right? So yeah, so these are like becoming fairly common. And for those who don't know what phishing is, I'll just give you a quick primer. What happens is they send these spam links to users through mail, through SMS. They send the links out in some way to the user, maybe at a popular site where they can, generate AI images or something, and they need to click something. So the users click the link, and they somehow open a pop-up, or some way they're shown a login screen. Now the login screen looks like it's from Microsoft, and if your users are getting prompted every day, they can't tell the difference between this, right? So they see this login prompt. They don't notice that URL is not from Microsoft. They see the prompt. They start typing in their username and password. But what the phishing kit, these sites do is they're proxying the request between Azure AD and the user's browser. So everything the user types in, the username, the password, even the MFA prompt, all of those things are visible to the attacker. And they can harvest those username, password. And if it's an MFA prompt, they can even get those cookies, the tokens. So they don't even need the user's details anymore. They can just get the tokens and replay it on their machine, and they're in, right? So the user is unaware of this. They get in. They then sort of they can add a new MFA option for the against user's profile, and then they already know the password. They can now do MFA approvals on their own. They don't need the user to approve it for them, right? So they could be hiding in the cloud. User is not aware of it, and they could be there for months on it. So these are fairly common, and one of the biggest, so the problems with us prompting our users to sign in all the time, it sort of conflates the right? It makes it bad because we are basically training our users to get phished, right? The more we prompt them, we tell them sign in every week, sign in every month. The more we keep telling them to do that, the more they're used to, hey, I see a login page, I'm just going to start typing my username and password, right? They should be in a state, you should be in a state where they see a login page, they should go, why am I seeing this login page? Like I never see a login page, right? So that should be the experience we want to get to. So it leads to compromise. We train our users to be phished. There's productivity impact, and especially with macOS, right? We don't have native single sign-on with Azure AD. It needs to be set up and deployed. So it doesn't come out of the box, and users are used to seeing these prompts and signing in, and we need to do everything we can to sort of reduce those prompts. So what should we do? We should try to only prompt when needed, right? Not all the time. Such as a person gets a new device, yes, they sign in. That should be sort of like the only time that they need to do a sign in. Or if they go to some new location, or maybe we detect, Azure AD detects that the user is now suddenly on a different pattern, they're signing in from a different place that they're not used to, then Azure AD could do a prompt for them. And those are capabilities that Azure AD has, where admins can turn them on, risk-based sign-in, where we can detect changes and then only prompt for maybe just for MFA to know, is this the right user that's coming in? And then moving to things like passwordless technologies, where passkeys are coming up across in Apple, Google, in all of the ecosystems. But so that when users do have to type in a login screen, they don't need to do the whole password, typing in a password and resetting the password and so on. So in short, prompts are bad. So before I jump into the next one, I do have a question. How many of you, so I've been at Microsoft for like 3 years. How many times do you think I have changed my password in the last 3 years? Anyone saying more than 6 times? More than 3 times in the last year if I change it every year? Never change the password? Yeah. Yeah, so the answer is I've never changed my password since I joined Microsoft. I rarely type in my password at all. On a Mac, I do have to type in sometimes, but at Microsoft, we don't do password resets at all. NIST doesn't recommend it. Most of the industry doesn't recommend it. And when users have to change their password, everything breaks. They need to then go in and sign into multiple apps, sign in on the desktop, and so on. So we don't change our password. We only change the password when we notice that something has happened to the user's account, right? That we suddenly notice them coming from a different country where they were not coming in before. Then we ask them to not change. We ask them to do an MFA. But if we notice that maybe it's a compromised password, we do some calculations. then your admin can set up a flow where the user is taken through a password change flow and they can change the password. So some protections are put in to prevent to do that flow. Okay, so single sign-on options. What are the different sign-on options we have in Azure AD? Sorry, on macOS. macOS, you have the old school way, right? Which most of you might be familiar with, which is using Kerberos, doing a bind and getting the user to sign in. You have that sign in, but Apple is telling users to move away from this because there is the new Kerberos SSO extension that's now available that you can use to provide a better experience for Kerberos on the SSO. But the one that I'm mostly talking about today is the modern authentication, where you use an identity provider initiated sign-in. And it could be something like Azure AD or any of the other IDPs, depending on what you're using. You could use them to do the new enterprise single sign-on flow. Now, there are two types of sign-in flows. One is credential, the other one is redirect. So Azure AD, we've implemented the redirect option, and I'm going to walk you through what that is. But before I talk about that, I'm just going to talk about the Kerberos SSO and why it doesn't really work. So Kerberos was built for a different era, right? Before there was internet, it's a very chatty protocol. It assumed the server and the client were sort of in the same room or in the same building. It would keep sending, talking between the server all the time. But it just doesn't scale over the internet, and it doesn't even work over the internet because there are lots of proxies and firewalls. They just block that sort of traffic because it needs lots of ports open between the server and the workstation, right? It can't just go through only the HTTP, HTTPS proxy flows. So imagine when you have now a cloud application, your ServiceNows, your Salesforce, your Workdays, which are all living in the cloud, and the user is trying to access the application. Maybe they're at home, or maybe they are in a cafe and they're not connected to the VPN. If you try to get a Kerberos token by, you need to send the username and password to Active Directory or one of the on-prem servers and get a token, you try to send that, the firewall will block that traffic from coming in because that sort of traffic is not allowed in most corporate enterprises. So it doesn't work, then the user has to resort to connecting to a VPN and then, being connected to the VPN and draining the batteries and so on. Right, so the future is modern auth. That's what the world is moving to. It works over the internet. It can be either SAML based or it can be OpenID or OAuth, right? So most of your cloud SaaS applications do it, and even your on-prem applications, your vendors are doing. So if you're getting new vendors and they're bringing in services that are not cloud-based, you should sort of really evaluate and ask for the cloud-based version of it. Or sometimes there are different options, and you just go with the default with the Kerberos one because it's easier. But you should definitely be looking at using SAML and OAuth. The other advantages are it's very modern, flexible. It's a browser-based sign-in, so you are not limited to just a dialogue with the username and password. You can use the full-blown like authenticate app. You can use certificates. You can use security keys, and now the new pass keys that will come. So you'll be able to use your Face ID, Touch ID things to get into your work account as well at some point in the future, right? So using to modern auth and making sure your apps are also using modern auth will help you live in that future world where you can do that. Okay, so what's the goal? Our goal at Microsoft is not to show you lots of login screens all the time. We want your users to see a login screen only once per device, the user signing in for the first time, and that's it. We don't want them seeing a login page again until, for example, if they need to change their password. But if you don't have a password change policy, then that should be it, right? They get a new device, they sign in, that's it. It should just keep working behind the scenes. Users should only be prompted if something changes in their security posture. And we might need to just do another MFA, for example. But we don't want them to do that, but it's also the most secure option. So how that works is when the user signs in, we have what is called a primary refresh token. This is for the entire device. There's a token that's issued when the user signs in. So they send their username, they go to the login screen to Azure AD, they sign in, Azure AD issues them what's called a primary refresh token. It's valid for a long time, but it keeps renewing. So as long as the user is active for like 14 days, say they didn't go on a vacation, they didn't lock it up and go on a vacation 40 days, they use it at least once in 14 days, that token gets renewed for another 14 days. So it's a rolling window. It keeps on extending. Where it goes to Azure AD, it sends details about the device posture, in the sense if you have MDM, you get all of those compliance information that's being checked behind the scenes, and the token can keep on renewing. So that's stored at the platform level, at a system level. Then every time the user tries to access an application, maybe they open up Teams or they open Slack or Outlook, each app will then use that primary refresh token. So each app won't ask the user a username and password, because they signed in once. There is the primary refresh token, or the PRT, that will be used to issue a token for that individual application. So each app behind the scenes, you'll just see it redirect, but then the user gets the token, they come in, they don't need to type in their username, password, or sign in. They just get the single sign-on experience. So when the user signs in, there are two tokens that are issued. One's called a refresh token, the other one is called an access token. So this is per application. The access token is only valid for an hour. So we give an access token, the user goes ahead to Outlook or Teams or ServiceNow or Workday. They keep working and they are working on the application. At the end of an hour, the token expires. So behind the scenes, a call goes out back to Azure AD saying, this is my refresh token. Can you give me another access token? And Azure AD will validate, has this user's password changed? Have they been disabled? Has the account been disabled? So we do a lot of checks. If all of those pass, then a new access token is issued. So this way, even if an attacker gets the token, they have it for a short time, which is only for valid for 1 hour. There are newer things we are doing called continuous access evaluation, where we reduce that even to like a few minutes. So if someone disconnects their machine or changes their password, within a few minutes we can sort of prompt them again saying your password has changed. But for most things, it's just that 1 hour access token and the refreshing one. Any questions there? That anything you didn't follow? Yep.
Quick question. We're using this for a lot of SaaS apps. We've just taken on a new HRIS system that our HR people can't log into because it says they've been logged in for longer than 90 days.
Right.
And that's a setting on the SaaS application. And they said to us, we've got that limit for security.
Yes.
Is there something you could share where I can go back and say, it's nonsense?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I can, so the question was, we have an app that has its own sort of timeout period. And then after the time, yours is good, it's 90 days. I know of a customer where they have like Workday, which is like 2 weeks or 1 week. So even the Azure AD is given a long-term token and they'll have to sign in, the app signs them out and says, you need to go and sign back in. So we definitely have material where we share about, not prompting the user to not have them sign, because we want the admin and the identity admin, the authentication folks, to be the people who control that policy. Because they could say, if you're coming from a device that's not managed, a high risk one, I don't want it to be 90 days. I want it to be every day you need to sign in if you're not coming in from a secure device, right? So your admins should have that flexibility, and with conditional access policy in Azure AD, they can define those things. And we definitely have guidance on, that you can take back to those. Because each SaaS app, if it starts having its own policy, then the admins won't know like what's happening, and users will be getting sign-ins at different times, and it's not a good user experience. So that definitely needs to change. Right. So coming back to how it works with the modern auth, what you need for the Apple SSO to work, you need a few things in place, right? The first one is you need an IDP that supports SAML or OpenID Connect. So Azure AD is the IDP that like at Microsoft we work with, but there are others. If you're using any other IDP, you can use them as long as they support the Enterprise SSO plugin from Apple. The apps that you use need to be integrated with the IDP. If your app is still talking to on-prem AD or ADFS, that's not good. We want you to move those apps to Azure Active Directory, to a cloud IDP, so that you can make use of all of this. The vendor must create the SSO plugin. So we as Microsoft have created a plugin for Azure AD. For other IDPs, you need to go to your IDP vendor to get the plugin that you need. And then lastly, the Macs that you use need to be under managed. So that's how Apple have designed it, that the extension can only be deployed through the MDM provider. So you need your Macs to be under MDM to work. Right. So the modern approach is to use IDP with modern auth. There's an SSO extension that's bundled. So at Microsoft, we try to limit the number of packages, agents that people need to install. So what we've done is we packaged the extension in the Microsoft Company Portal, which is what we use for Intune. So even if you're using something like Jamf Pro and others, you still need to just deploy the Company Portal. Users don't need to sign in or interact with it at all, but you still need to push that out because the extension, SSO extension for Azure AD is bundled in the Company Portal. So that's where the package is. So you just need to deploy that, but your users don't need to interact with it. Right, so we have that, and what happens when the user signs in for the very first time using the extension, they go sign in with the username, password, MFA, all of that. They get the primary refresh token, which is then stored on the device. So PRTs, just a quick refresher, is valid for 14 days, and it's sort of constantly renewing over time. Now, there's one thing, as I explained this, that I need to cover is the Microsoft Authentication Library. So what we've done is, without rewriting our authentication code all the time, for all Microsoft first-party apps, we've written something called MSAL, Microsoft Authentication Library, and it's the same sort of library available for iOS, for Android, for Mac, for Windows, and we allow our partners to also use that same library. So it's open source, and our vendors can use it. So if they use the library, it automatically handles talking to the SSO extension. The devs don't need to write additional code. But if they're not using MSAL, then devs need to write code against the Apple API to make sure that they are using the new SSO extension to get the tokens. Right? If they don't support that, then they won't be in the whole single sign-on experience flow. Right? So that's one thing to cover, and I'll cover some major apps that don't still support that. So if they're using MSAL, it's all taken care of. MSAL will directly talk to the extension to get the token, and I'll show you how that works. So AAD validates the PRT, and then it returns an app-specific token. So this is, if the user is trying to access M365, it takes the PRT, gives them an app-specific token, and then the client can send the token to Azure AD. So what the SSO extension does is it sits in the middle, and it doesn't let the user see the login page. It takes that and says, okay, I have a PRT for this. I'll give the PRT to Azure AD and get it. So it does it behind the scenes. So the user doesn't really see the login screen at all. They don't see the page to type in the username and password. Right. So when you don't have MSAL, if you're a dev that's writing code for your application, you say, for example, Safari. Safari is not, the Apple devs are not using the MSAL library. They've written it with their own extension. Say the user is using the Safari browser trying to access M365. Now, instead of going straight there, the macOS network stack hijacks that request when the user tries to go to the Microsoft Azure AD login page. Then it goes and sends that to the extension. And then the extension says, let me get you a token for O365. And it comes back with the app-specific token, gives that back to Safari, and then Safari shares that. So Safari, by implementing the Enterprise SSO stack, it can work this way. So the advantage is, for Safari, they didn't have to write code for Microsoft. They didn't have to write for Ping. They didn't have to write for every IDP in the world. Same way, devs don't need to write to handle it for every IDP. They just need to make their code work with the SSO extension, and then it'll work with any identity provider with a single sign-on experience. Right? So that's how it comes. Okay, so from here on, it's mostly demos, and I hope I can hope it all works. Right, so I'm going to give you a demo of how the single sign-on works. So let me open the browser. I go to office.com and I should see a sign-in screen. I don't see it. I'm in. So that's my demo. It's done. All good. Okay. Let me do something else. So let me open a private screen. And then I'll try to go to office.com. So it's an in private session. There are no cookies there. I come in and click sign in. What do you think will happen? Will I get through single sign on or not? Most of you have deployed, so you know the answer. You get in. You're not prompted. It works too well in this case. Like users don't expect this to happen, but the Enterprise SSO plugin works too well and just lets you single sign on. So I think that's a bug that should be fixed. Yeah. Okay, so let me, in this session itself, I am signed in. Let me go here and what do you think will happen if I delete all my cookies? I remove everything now, right? So this is my primary Safari window. I deleted all the cookies. I'll even close the browser and quit. What are the bets that sign on will work? How many say sign on will work? How many say it won't work? Taking bets, right? So I click sign in. What does it do? It goes to the extension. The extension takes that, exchanges a PRT, and you're signed in, right? So it all works fine. But like if you still want to see how this happens behind the scenes, I've installed. I'm getting a proxy coming up, so it's going to show us all the traffic that's happening behind the scenes. Let me open a private session. I'll just clear this to make it easier to follow. We'll go to office.com, right? And I hit, let me clear this. So I hit sign in, and you can see behind the scenes, what do you see here? So you can see the sign in going to Safari, and then there's a request to login.microsoftonline.com. But what happens here? You can see the Mac SSO extension has hijacked that request, right? And instead of taking the user to the login page and showing them the login page, it's doing something. So it does a post, an initial post, it sends some cookies. It gets back in the response like a nonce that comes in. It's sort of like a one use token cookie that comes back from the Azure AD. Then what's happening here is the extension now does another request. This time it is sending through the primary refresh token. So we've been talking about the PRT quite a lot. So now you can actually see the PRT, right? So it's sending the PRT token across, and that's where the exchange happens. It comes back with a list of cookies that are set on the browser saying, okay, for this app, I'm setting these cookies with the tokens that the app can use. So when the app is calling Graph API and others to get data about the user, all of that will work. So just to play around with this, we can copy the token. If you go to your browser, we have a page called j.ms. So it's a JWT token. I'm so used to double clicking to maximize. Right, so here's the token. I decode it, and you can see that it's a refresh token. It has an expiry date. Now these need to be converted to actual dates, but there's an expiry date. There's a nonce that's being passed, which was sent in the initial request, and the actual refresh token, the PRT. So that's sent across, and that's how the sign-in happens. So if you're troubleshooting, trying to find out what's happening behind the scenes, this gives you a look into how the extension comes in. If not, all you're seeing is a browser, and it either works or it doesn't work. And when it doesn't work, you're like, what's happening? I don't know what's happening. So this helps you sort of get to and understand the flow. Okay, so these are browser. Okay, so the browser is good. Let's try the same thing with Outlook, right? So a native application that's using the Microsoft library, which knows how to talk to the extension. So the user comes in, they've signed in. So the idea is they need to have signed in at least once using either Safari or one of the supported apps. So once you've signed in, they've got the PRT. They type in their email address, and it's again now opening the screen. Now, if you go back to the proxy, you will see that it's doing sort of a similar thing. And instead of the Mac extension, you would be seeing it says Microsoft Outlook, right? So instead of Safari, it says that it's the Outlook plugin that came in. Same sort of dance. It sends the tokens across, does a single sign-on, and that's it. And I'm signed in. I get access to all my emails through that sign-on experience. So as long as your app vendors are calling into the right APIs, they have modernized the app to use either Apple's APIs or they're using the Microsoft Authentication Library, which in turn calls the Apple API for them, they will get a single sign-on experience. Guess which app doesn't work? Yeah, so it requires the vendor to support it, right? So you go to office.com and why is that not working? Okay. Okay. It's refusing to demo it. It could be the proxy. Okay, all right. So no sign-on experience. If you go to the proxy, you'll see it's Chrome. Even if it goes to the login.microsoftonline URL, it's still Chrome handling it. There is no handoff to the extension. So that's because Chrome doesn't implement it, Firefox don't implement it. But there's hope because for Windows PRT, the Chrome just added native support this month. So macOS should hopefully come soon, or I don't know, whenever they decide on implementing it. But our Edge team and others are sort of trying and working, getting that in. Okay, so we looked at how to set it up. The next one is how do you deploy it. So this is for those who haven't deployed it. I'm just going to, sorry for switching so much. I'm just going to open up my browser. Let me do a demo. Like how do you go set up the Enterprise SSO in your organization, right? So if you're having Jamf Pro, you go to computers, to your configuration profile. Now we do have all of these documented here in the Enterprise SSO guide. If you come in here, all the prerequisites, we have instructions for Intune, for Jamf. If you're using any other MDM, we have the instructions over here as well. So all you have to do is just follow the guide there. So it's as simple as just coming in, filling one form. You say new, you go down to the single sign-on extension, copy paste the values in, and then you're done, right? So what you do need to do is copy some of these values. So these are fixed things that are used to identify the device. So you identify Microsoft to the Apple device. So you just need to copy them, put in all those URLs, and then save, and that's it, right? So you say add, copy paste all those values, upload the plist file with whatever you want to configure, and you're good. If for those who are on Intune, you go to devices, and you can then, because it's out of the box, like we can support it natively on Intune, you can go into configuration profile, you create a new profile, pick your platform, macOS. There is a template for device features, so you create that and give it a name. Let's say Enterprise SSO. There is a single sign-on extension. You pick Azure AD. Now, because it's Azure AD, we pre-configure a lot of things. So all you have to do is you can just stop there and you can just say next, and that's it. You all say done. So it might be a good feature request to get Jamf to have an option to just pre-fill all that for you if it's Azure AD. Awesome. Right. So that's all of the steps you need to do to deploy. I'll just skip through those screens I showed you. Now, if you want to, right, Yeah, so we'll go through that. So some things to keep in mind. It's the extension from Microsoft still in public preview. It is not what we call generally available, but it's public preview means we do support it for production. You can call the help desk, Microsoft support if there are any issues. We do support it even in public preview state. It's just that some of our SLAs for getting back are not applied. The apps must use extension. We saw that with Chrome and Firefox, they don't still support it. And you as customers or users of these, you can ask your vendors to make sure that when you get them, that they implement these things. Have that as part of your app selection criteria when you choose apps that they support these things. The extension window doesn't support FIDO2 security keys yet. Something we're working on, but you can still use passwordless sign-in for that. Right, so my last thing is about troubleshooting. So what happens if it doesn't work? So this is meant more for your help desk team. So if someone calls the help desk and they say like, I'm seeing prompts, I'm not able to sign in, we've sort of written a very detailed guide. Maybe it's like too detailed, but we start from the very basics. So for example, they've not even enrolled into Intune or into Jamf Pro, so into MDM. So we have the help desk sort of, they can go through all those checks. Have you installed MDM? Is your OS supported in the first place? So there's this whole troubleshooting guide that we share that your help desk team can use. So how do you see it? So let me just quickly jump onto my VM. If you go to, how do you know if the extension has been deployed or not? If you open profiles here, you will see there is an extension. And the first thing is to check that the thing is, let me make it bigger. So you can see the extension is there. Sorry. Yeah. So make sure that your tenant, your Azure AD tenant name comes up. You'll see that the extension has been deployed. And other things to make sure are that the extension, whatever the string, is the right string. Make sure all of those are valid, the URLs are there, and so on. So you can use that to validate that it's there. Other things you can do is check in the keychain. So these, I'm just going to walk through some of the things. I'm almost out of time. But if you search for refresh in keychain, you will see this primary refresh token shown. For me, you can see it's been refreshed 7/13 today. So if it's more than 14 days, maybe the token has expired, and then the user might need to do a sign-in. So there is a detailed step-by-step guide that we published where you can check all these things. You can send a diagnostic report as well. So if you use the company portal app, if you open up company portal, users don't need to even sign in, but if you say go to help and save a report, it will create a log for you. And if I open the log, I just opened that recently. Okay. Yeah. So if you open the log, it will show you, the details about the sign-in flow. Yeah, we got that one. Yeah. So you can see, what's been happening behind the scenes for the extension to work, what it did, and so on. So you get those details in the log. Yeah, so we have all of this documented. There is a good guide. We are working on a script to automate the troubleshooting guide. So if you go here, it's a long doc which has all these details, but we're working on writing a script that you can run that can quickly check a lot of these things and give you an update as to this might be where this particular device is stuck and it's not working. Cool, perfect. So with that, thanks a lot. Feel free to ask questions after this. I've shared this deck at ak.ms/xworld, or the QR code will take you there. I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn. I'm on the Microsoft AAD channel on MacAdmin. So if you have SSO questions, you can ask there. Oh, thanks very much.